Hello, folks. This week on Around the Coin, we took another approach to the rapid-fire topics. We had, I think, about five solid topics that we covered with Brian, Faisal, and I, Mike, here. So the first topic we discussed is Faisal's work on this periodic table, which is a pretty incredible project that he's worked on to collect all the payment history, the structure of the landscape, international, U.S., banking, all the way down to consumer products. It's an amazing piece that he put together, and we discussed what he's working on there. So definitely want to check that out. We discussed the federal government, U.S. federal government, now accepts Dwolla and PayPal, which is a big step in the right direction. Samsung acquired LoopPay to compete with Apple Pay, and we discussed that, as well as Will Grayland, the founder and CEO. We did a one-year recap on the Facebook acquisition of WhatsApp for $19 billion, which to date hasn't been any major accomplishments. They haven't released any large bits of data, so we're looking forward to what comes out there and made some predictions. And lastly, we touched on the Stripe's incorporation of Bitcoin, what that means and the future of Bitcoin as well towards the end. So I hope you enjoy, and as always, if you have any comments or feedback, do let us know. We'd like to incorporate all of those. Have a great day. All right, guys, it is another exciting episode. Brian, Faisal, and Mike here, tuning in from all across the world. We have a nice lineup of topics today that I'm really excited about. We're going to start off with an exciting piece by Faisal, but before that, how are you guys doing?
Doing great.
Good morning.
Faisal checking in from Pakistan. What city in Pakistan are you in, Faisal?
In Karachi right now.
Karachi. And Brian is somewhere on the west side of the U.S. skiing, sloping. He's actually on the mountain right now.
Deer Valley, Utah.
Deer Valley, Utah.
It is absolutely amazing today.
Beautiful
absolutely
out there.
Yep, I'm actually doing field research, literally and figuratively. Utah has the highest density of, this part of Utah has the highest density of NFC-enabled terminals because of the former ISIS, now SoftCard, consortium. They literally subsidized the area, made it as one of their test cases and use cases. And I could tell you one of the reasons I'm out here is to gain real concrete information about growth of NFC, actual use cases, and very interesting, the psychodemographic. This is the home, of the Sundance Music and Movie and Entertainment Festival. Now it's really kind of growing quite a bit. And they saw a tremendous amount of Apple Pay, very intense activity. And I'll probably talk about that more in a future show.
Well, we certainly look forward to that. Yes. The more Apple Pay we can get, the better life is.
Mom and apple pie.
Yeah. Faisal, what's new with you? I know you've been working on this piece, obviously pumping out a ton of great content on Quora. What other kind of things have you been thinking about? This periodic table I thought was fascinating. Do you want to jump right in and explain to everyone what?
So over the couple of weeks ago, I came across this periodic table for content marketing. It was just so well done. Taking a regular periodic table from chemistry, made a blank out of it, and then put in all the various fields of content marketing. So, it was just so well organized. I was thinking, how cool would it be to make something like this for money? So I just, decided to put the topics down. What would be the topics? Payment instrument, payment type, institution, AML, KYC, and I just, I was thinking I was going to do a periodic table, but I decided to put it in a mind map. And, the topic started, the branches started to increase and increase and increase. So now I have something like maybe 30 branches. So it's almost impossible to put it in a periodic table. So I decided, what, I'm going to stick with the mind map and do it. So I, started building it up. And, but then I stopped. I said, let me research. Maybe I'm wasting my effort in something. And I, researched extensively for about 2 days. Couldn't find anything remotely close to what I wanted to do on the internet. So basically what it is, it's a mind map for money. And it's, It tackles the history of money. It tackles, let's say, the marketing of money, the measurement of money, the institutions, the things like what are your delivery channels, what are your networks, what type of money do we have, how is pricing set, how is AML, KYC done, regulations, payment methods, payment system operators, delivery channels. So quite a lot of information. So if you're going to be looking at money, and money could be from a startup point of view, in a payment app, a banking app, being a money transmitter, anything to do with money, chances are this mind map will probably help you in some manner. It'll give you the overall, the tentacle reach of the payment systems world, the money world. That would include banking as well.
So this is obviously a massive, massive project that the whole world needs.
No, it's not. I mean, it's not massive. Just that the mind map looks massive. And if you're in the payment space, once you look at it, you say, wow, okay, nice work. But I just think it's something that should go out. And it's obviously open source. And if people want to add up to it or use the file and somehow modify it and use it for their own use, go ahead. My pleasure. So I just think it's. So if you don't know much about the payment space, or if you don't know much about certain banking aspects or what have you, at least you can look at the entire ecosystem in one picture. And that's what it sort of allows you to do.
Yeah, I remember when I first got into it, when I was working at Zing, building a web point of sale system and trying to learn, how merchant accounts, how acquiring banks work. It's all extremely complex. And I think the payment industry is known for just being very opaque, right? There's not an easy way to disseminate how the whole system works.
Yeah. And payments, you have to understand, is a subset of the banking umbrella, right? So the banking itself is very complex, but it doesn't have to be so,
Yeah. And what do you think, what is the core reason for that, that lack of transparency there? Is there advantages in the banks to have sort of not confusion, but not a very open, transparent mindset? Did it come from a previous history of banks concealing their information, which led to
I think
business?
it does. I definitely think it does, and I think anyone who's read banking history would agree that there are a lot of questions that would be asked today in this current fiat system, in this fractional reserve banking system. And I think that we are adding layers upon layers upon layers of big, thick information just to sort of not answer the baseline question, what's happening with our money. I mean, the fact that your money in the US, every dollar when it's created is a debt. It's not even a credit. It's not even a value. It's a debt because of the mere fact that the US government is borrowing this money from the Federal Reserve. I mean, you have to think about that. Every dollar that is created is a debt. It has to be paid back. And the problem is you can't pay it back because you don't have interest. The money for the interest doesn't exist, and so forth. So the banking world has made it more and more complex. And I think it's done by design. It's not an accidental thing. I think it's done by design.
And how far up the tree of if you watch any of the documentaries around how money is lended between banks, there's a lot of people out there that I think that think at the high level in terms of world banks, there's a lot of corruption. Would you acknowledge that there is, or do you think it's more kind of skepticism and hype in terms of the lack of transparency leading to some of those, dicey decisions when you get up to the big banks?
There's something called the inverted pyramid. I think you must see that. It's called the inverted pyramid of money. If you Google for it, you'll probably see it. So the real value, or real money, which is the earthbound materials like silver, palladium, gold, etc. There's only 1% liquidity of that, and that's the real money. And then from as you go onward and up the inverted pyramid, you'll see a lot of money and wealth being created that simply doesn't exist. It can actually collapse. So I don't know about the corruption element, but we certainly are fooled You know, that's a mild way of putting at it. But then we're also so complacent about it. You know.
Yeah, it always seems like anytime you can fight, things like what you're doing here, those are the kind of things that can start momentum in society to start bringing out more transparency around different things. I remember when we wrote the article around FlowTab, when we closed up shop and we wrote the whole story in TechCrunch, it really started, and I think there was kind of trickles at the time between being open around what companies are doing and how startups, close up shop and what they actually do. And when we wrote all of it down, it almost started a little, snowball dropping and starting an avalanche of companies and startups just being more transparent. And I could see the same sort of thing happening here where, executives at banks or even local marketing people that want to post things, and they have conversations internally and they say, should we post our numbers? Should we post, this sort of growth and the interesting stats and figures and the structure of the banks? But they decide not to because no one else does. And they kind of need that momentum.
Well, I think it's clear that anytime you try to post, and I think Brian and Mike, you both will agree, anytime someone tries to post something, which is alarming or, which is beyond the obvious, that person is ostracized from the society. They either become a whistleblower or they say, he's wacko, he doesn't know anything, etc.
Faisal, I gotta agree. I got to agree with you. I mean, the whole challenge, especially when speaking about the money system, the whole challenge is it's designed to be complex. It's designed for people to sort of doze off, especially if you haven't been trained in history and you haven't been trained in basic accounting. Just double entry accounting systems most people don't understand. And you start looking at what economic systems were based upon, it becomes boring to a lot, but some people it awakens them, and it starts them on a journey of trying to understand. I think ultimately it should come down to a philosophical question: is money is equivalent to life energy. You have X number of years on a planet, and what are you dedicating your pursuit for? And that's the one side of it. The other side of it is who's really in control of that, and are their agendas aligning with the agenda of you, and maybe to the agenda of your family, your greater group, your society, your clan. Those things start coming down the pike. But it is an interesting time we live in right now because we have conflicting financial systems that could arise from an open ledger, and it may bring about a much different sort of thinking about what the symbolic thing is that we call money. In my pocket, to keep me real, I carry a almost 6,000 year, maybe older, Sumerian ring coin. It's a bit of bronze shaped in a circle, not even quite complete. It looks like a snake going after its tail. Not ironic at all there. I mean, there's some symbolism there. And I handle this and I say to myself, at one time, thousands of people were doing anything they could to get this little piece of bronze. And to them, it was worth everything to have this. This is when it became an abstract currency, because originally it wasn't. And here we are. Someday, anthropologists are going to look back and say that this culture, this generation, or this epoch was chasing decimal places in a series of numbers on some computer. And if the decimal place moved more to the left, they were not so happy. If it moved more to the right, they were more happy. And that was it, because that's what it really comes down to. And we tie our entire psychology around it. So those things, I think, are the primary base points to build this knowledge on. And then when you start trying to understand what the economy is like and why it's structured in such a way, you can bring it back to your own self-reference. Otherwise, it's really a very, very esoteric conversation. Even though this sounds esoteric, it really becomes very abstract. So a great project to build this mind map, and I think everybody should be looking at the results of this.
Well, hopefully when we publish this podcast, the mind map should be complete, and we'll publish it with it.
Beautiful.
Now, is there going to be a phase 2? Are you going to put this in a book? Is this going to be a part of a bigger collection of pieces?
No. The first is a mind map. The second is take some feedback, because obviously there are a lot of people who can contribute towards it. And the third is to then break it down, because this is a snapshot of the entire monetary system. Third step would be to take it down, break it down into portions, and make individual periodic tables for each portion. For one for, let's say, AML KYC, one for payment methods, one for institutions, one for circulation of money and so forth, etc.
That's awesome. I think there's so many people who would find this incredibly valuable. Obviously, if you want to be more involved in this, reach out to Faisal. He's very easy to get a hold of, and I'm sure would love to have contributors to this project.
Absolutely.
Cool. Well, we look forward to seeing that. Shall we jump on to the next topic we have?
Which is the federal portal opens to Dwolla.
Right. Now, Faisal, pre-show we were talking about the Dwolla and just describing kind of the company and what the differences are, particularly that Dwolla seems to have this exception to the rule scenario. I mean, in terms of almost everything the company is.
He's a maverick, So
yeah.
Belmanley, the CEO, he's a maverick. He feels it. He understands that, the systems right now that we have in place are complex by design. You can't question them, so to speak. And he went out and built a system, from Iowa, out of of all the places in the world, that's called Dwolla, and it's pretty cool. And transactions under $10 are free. Transactions over $10, doesn't matter how much you move, are 25 cents or something. I think 25 cents, if I'm not mistaken, flat fee. And then he also went out and built a real-time RTGS system called, I think it's called a FinSync, FiSync or something like that, which is basically FiSync. So it's a real-time RTGS for instant payments, but very few institutions are actually connecting to it. But that would essentially allow what the U.S. has been missing out on, which is having instantaneous payment settlements. But I think not to deviate from the topic, the federal government has a website called pay.gov, which is the U.S. government's web portal for collecting payments for federal agencies. And the fact that they've opened up for PayPal, which obviously goes without saying, and Dwolla, goes to show that Dwolla is considered as a viable payment alternative in the U.S., at least in the federal government's eyes. So that's a big thing. And I think Brian touched upon Apple Pay last time, didn't we?
Yeah, Faisal, I was in Washington, D.C., and we had a number of meetings talking about how the federal government could get more deeply involved in helping incubate and propose extended standards where we can have equivalent ACH systems that you see in other parts of the world. And I must say that Dwolla came up quite a bit in the conversations I've had. And the thing that's really interesting is the current ACH system is fractured on a number of different levels, not only on a software level, but on an infrastructure level within the bank's accounting systems of how they're actually calling that money into their books and how it's coming out of their books. And then, some people just call that as a bank wanting to get interest. It's actually a lot more complex than that. There's underwriting guarantees and standards and all kinds of accounting methods that we uncovered in some research we were doing for this project. And Dwolla was addressing those things in their proposed standard. The difficulty is you need to have somebody marshal around it. The very first thing that Dwolla did that made them become more interesting to the federal government was helping some state governments solve revenue collection issues. And so they've been very successful in a number of state governments, not only saving money for consumers, taxpayers, and in some cases the state government itself, but also accelerating the flow of money. And when you start really researching the subject, the faster you can move the money, the better it actually is for the economy. It's one of the reasons why we put together the Fast Pay initiative that President Obama signed as a way to make sure that small and medium-sized government and private contractors get paid within the net terms that are due in their contract. Apple and IBM and some very large companies committed to 15-day net terms, and that was to increase the velocity and movement of money. It lifts up the economy. The same is true with the initiative of what Pay.gov is about. And so Dwolla is really in that direction. PayPal is a little bit in that direction, but there is that delay.
A little bit in that direction.
The problem with PayPal is the money is on deposit at PayPal. It's not in somebody's checking account. So there's an intermediate level, and that was really concerning a lot of the people that were sort of thinking about this. So long term, the government, from the executive part of the government, the part that I was dealing with during the summer, I have to say I'm extremely impressed by the team that is surrounding the president on this. They are wide open looking at algorithmic blockchain things that Dwolla is doing, cutting edge type of things, and doing the best that they can to move the public dialogue and narrative and attention in this direction. And I think it's now in Dwolla's court to take this football and a run, not just one or two states, but every state in the country, United States, should start looking at adopting this as a form of payment. And that might lay the groundwork to allow for other entities to start using it, and may motivate banks. I mean, you can't make a bank utilize Dwolla at this stance, but at some future date, it might make a lot of sense. And there's other things like Ripple and what Stellar is doing. And let me tell you, those things are not being ignored. They're being studied.
Do you think Dwolla just sets the tone in terms of the willingness to accept the at least potential to use these kinds of services? They're definitely the forefront leader there.
I think Venmo sets the tone, and I think that's because Venmo is owned by PayPal. That's why they have to use the PayPal name. But I think Venmo sort of sets the tone, and I think many people don't know. I think Samuel gave me a quote which said that almost, I think it was 90 or 95% of all mobile payments done in the U.S. are actually on Starbucks, but Venmo does more business per day than Starbucks, combined. On mobile payments. So Venmo is a very powerful wallet. And then, you can't just have a singular wallet. You need a secondary wallet. What do you get? Dwolla, I can't think of another name immediately, at least. So, but the fact that the U.S. government is opening it up to consider all payment channels, I think that's a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
I think it's great leadership. And now, like I said, it's a marketing thing. The technology there does Dwolla have strong enough marketing to reach into these various entities to try to get more adoption? I mean, that's the biggest challenge right now.
I mean, it'd be interesting. I think Dwolla, for better or worse, for them personally, I think they've kind of been out of the spotlight of the consumer experience, right? I don't see personally a lot of people using Dwolla. It does seem to be more of a B2C transactional tool, and especially you can see through Dwolla's attempts to, successfully work with the government. Then they're kind of seeing, I think, their niche upstream rather than being the Venmo, which is purely consumer based. It does seem like they have, and maybe just the personality of the team or the connections or sort of their approach and what they built, but yeah, it does seem like they have a niche that they've really carved out.
Yeah, it's exciting times for the company right now with that endorsement.
Yep. All right, let's jump to Samsung acquires Loop to compete with Apple Pay.
Wow.
Brian, I know you're drooling over this. Do you think it's too late? Do you think competition by acquisition is a surefire loss?
There's a bigger story here, Mike and Faisal. Will Graylin and George Wallner are incredible payment minds. George Wallner was the CEO and founder of Hypercom. Hypercom was the large competitor to Verifone at one time. They were tied very closely to American Express. And one time, if you saw a Hypercom terminal in the wild, it was very likely given to that merchant by American Express. And their terminals were very well designed, very cutting edge features. They were the first to have much more open standards. I myself programmed dozens and dozens of applications. Time and attendance, I remember I was late 80s, early 90s, and there was really no great time and attendance software. So I hand-coded it within Hypercom's ecosystem, and it became exceedingly popular, sold that company. Did it on the Verifone system, but it was quite limited because of the way they designed the original Verifone API programming modules. So that's the DNA. So you have a couple of really smart guys along with their team. They actually invented the very, very first dongle for the mobile phone, the Roam data system. Much to the chagrin of people who think that it was a Square device. This was around almost 10 years prior. It actually is running on Nokias. The thing that wasn't there was the Square business model, which is certainly I think the really big part of what Square is about, not their hardware. Certainly that's going to become challenging as we move forward. So they sold that particular business off to primarily Will did off to Ingenico, and Ingenico's innovating around it. In fact, extending it around the world, making it tougher for a lot of the startup clones of Square in some regions. So they kind of sat around, and about a year and a half ago, I know some people there, and I know these founders, said, "Hey, Brian, you want to test something out?" And I said, "Sure." And I got a piece of hardware that looks really like it was this cobbled together, which I love. I mean, it was literally an inductive coil on a circuit board, kind of in an epoxy plastic type of case. And I was to go to a merchant, hold that in front of their terminal and say, "Okay, am I paid?" and walk out. And so you could see the challenge. They knew, and I knew, that there's something called a Code 10 challenge, which unless you're a merchant, unless you're trained, you don't even understand what a Code 10 challenge is. Code 10 says basically to you as a merchant from the payment card associations that you have to make sure that the payment vehicle you're accepting meets some basic standards of acceptability. You know, if it's a card, does it have a hologram on it? Does it have a magnetic strip? Is it signed? Does it look like it was altered in some way? Were the numbers flattened and re-imaged on it? All kinds of things. And if it isn't, you call the toll-free number and you say, "I have a code 10 here." And they will instruct you what to do next. In the old days, a code 10, I would supply the paperwork for a code 10 along with a big pair of scissors. Because in the early days,
you snap the card.
In the 80s and 90s, especially when we had paper merchants who were actually looking up the merchant had to look up the actual number to see if that number was in the negative file. There were the combined booklets that would come out sometimes twice a day for larger merchants towards the end. Literally, that's how you would look it up. And if the card was in there, you'd get out the big scissors and cut it in half and say, "Would you like me to retain it, or would you like to take it?" So obviously you don't see that very often today because some people got physically injured doing things like that for a number of different reasons. But the Code 10 requires that merchant to make some attempt to make sure what they're accepting isn't a particularly fraudulent vehicle. This was a problem with CoinCard. This was a problem with other type of innovations, and LoopPay is one of them. And that is, if the owner and the cashier is not trained to accept a certain type of technology, then they could very well code 10 it and say, "Listen, I don't recognize that as NFC. I have an NFC reader, and I know how that works. I don't recognize that as a credit card. I'm not going to take the liability. I'm going to deny that form of payment." Now, it becomes more complex if that merchant has no NFC device. All they have is a card reader, an old Verifone card reader. I come in, and I use this example, and it's a good way to illustrate it. It's a little over the top, but you're in a Texas bar, and it's 2:00 in the morning. You just got off the Mechanical Bull, and you gave everybody around, and you owe about $550 to Haas. And you walk up to Haas and say, "Haas, I want to use my phone." Haas looks at you, goes, "Hey, buddy, I need my money." He goes, "You accept credit card?" "Yeah." "Give me your credit card." "No, let me just hold my phone to that terminal behind the bar." Now, Haas ain't going to like it very much because Haas never was trained that that phone should be able to transmit payment. And if it does, what certainty does he have that it actually went through and it wasn't a hack? Mm-hmm. Therein lies the crux of LoopPay. And really savor that moment for a little bit. You're the merchant in this situation. You're not a technologist. You're not on Quora. You're not on Twitter. You don't really even fly in that group. You're not the 1%. You're the 90%. And you're Haas now at 2 a.m. and you just want to go home. And this guy's got his Samsung phone waving around. He ain't going to play it very long. So this is the challenge. Whereas if I sold that merchant the idea of accepting NFC, Haas would at least know that I created a terminal interface that would usually be on the other side of the bar, closer to the consumer, that they can hold their phone up. He would have a reasonable expectation and certainty of how that transaction would go through. And he would feel confident. So there's a confidence problem. And when you go out and read about this whole acquisition, you will not see a single tech writer or even business writer even address this issue. It's almost like it doesn't exist. And in reality, it doesn't, because they don't live in that world. But the two founders, they live in this world. They know this. They know that this was going to be an issue. It also is not tokenized and it's not encrypted. So what I'm basically doing is I'm taking this inductive loop, which is pretty much like a magnetic tape head that you would see in an old cassette player. And I'm expanding out all the coils of that wire, flattening out so it could fit inside a nice phone from Samsung. And it just pulses that loop in exactly the same manner as a card going through a slot of an old credit card terminal would pulse. It literally is creating an on-off binary type of signal. It's actually an analog, but we'll use that type of topography. So now we have this machine thinking a card went through it, and it does it brilliantly. And I got to tell you, I loved my analysis was when I first had this technology. I loved it. It's great. But you have to get Apple to adopt it or it's probably going to hurt you. And I don't want to go down that whole road. There was some involvement I had. But all I can say is at this point in 2007 or 2008, if this technology was relatively available on cell phones, we would be having a much different dialogue about the fork in the road of future payments, because it'd be EMV, it'd be NFC, and it would be the LoopPay technology enhanced with a form of encryption. So where are we today? Today we have a fork in the road, and I don't know where LoopPay fits in. The fork in the road is physical EMV. That's where the card goes into a slot. In the United States, this is what an EMV transaction means. You don't swipe a card. You insert the card or you dip the card into a slot, and you wait until you're directed by something or somebody, some force, to remove that card when the transaction's complete. This is called EMV signature. In other parts of the world, we have EMV chip and PIN. And now the consumer is in more control of that scenario because you put the EMV card in, you enter your PIN code, now you're okay to take the card out. In the United States, we don't have that clear demarcation. I'm calling this the EMV user experience fail in the United States, and it's a massive problem. I have data to support it. It's a massive problem. A lot of people who haven't studied this say, what's the big deal? Well, you have to realize that non-technology people are going to be dipping cards in these machines, and they're not going to remember exactly when they should be removing it, and the machine may not adequately notify them when to remove it. So cards are going to be left behind. Consumers are going to be frustrated. Lines are going to go long. Next step is NFC. We already know that. Apple Pay experience is about a 7-second cycle. EMV is going to be about 40 seconds on average. And then got LoopPay. LoopPay is using the old swipe technology. So first off, that is a dying species. Its day of extinction has pretty much already been laid in the groundwork. We wouldn't see LoopPay for anywhere to any degree after 7 years from today. You would pretty much not see these terminals in use. So it's a dying technology, but it's also using the wide open, non-encrypted credit card magnetic strip channel. So that means that anybody who is going to hack the signal by the Loop terminal, which is possible, or the data as it goes through the data stream of that terminal, which is not encrypted, can do it. What we saw take place at Target. And there's no one-use tokenization. So in an Apple Pay or in some EMV transactions, you can only use that particular card CVC number one time. In the case of Apple Pay, you take that card number, if you can break the encryption, NFC encryption and tokenization. If you take that card, it's 99% chance you're not going to get any use out of it unless you're using a credit card terminal that's quite old and you're keying it in. But those things are difficult. So it's running down a line where the rest of the world is moving towards encryption and tokenization, and they're not. Now, does that mean that they can be locked out of that? No, there's ways that this can happen. But what I would argue is that by getting these two payment experts, and I got to tell you, you cannot find better minds. They're in the top 20 minds between Will Grayland and George Wallner. You now have the potential of not just LoopPay, but Samsung seriously taking mobile payments to the next level. I wrote a piece on Quora about 2 years ago, and it was sort of a warning to startups and legacy companies, not just in payments, but just in general, that there are only about 100 really good minds in payments that have true empirical praxis and domain experience, and they are going to be running out of these great minds. With these two guys taken out of the market, it takes two great minds off of the table. It leaves startups, especially startups who've been around and not using empirical praxis and domain experience, is kind of guessing it, two less minds to work with. And so that's kind of where we are. What is it going to mean? It means it got great headlines, Samsung. It creates a dichotomy, LoopPay versus Apple Pay, or I really believe it's going to be Samsung Pay. The LoopPay might just be a technology term that they're using. So you got Samsung Pay versus Apple Pay. And the confusion of having a device that has both NFC built in and this magnetic induction technology built in, and the confusion and befuddlement factor of which do I use when, and the befuddlement on the consumer side, and the befuddlement factor on the merchant side. So are these solvable problems? To a certain degree, yes. I'm just not confident that the cashier training, the merchant training, and the education necessary to make this success a really successful system.
So there's some high friction points, is what you're saying there.
Yes.
They didn't release, at least to I haven't been able to find the acquisition price. What do you guys think the LoopPay was acquired
it
for?
wasn't mentioned. It wasn't mentioned, and I don't think it's very hard to predict. I want to say something to what Brian has said. I think there is and this is a counter argument, just so we know. I think there's a huge market opportunity for LoopPay outside the US, especially in emerging markets that will never get Apple Pay, at least in the next 5 years, because they don't even have Apple, let alone Apple Pay.
Right.
True. Very true.
And I think there are about maybe, I would say, between 75 and maybe 100 countries that would qualify for such. They have their existing systems, EMV, chip and pin. Sure, some of them may have it, some of them may not have it. But I think if you look at the 100 countries overall, and if they manage to sell, I don't know, 1 million devices a country, what have you, they'll sell 100 million devices overall. But those markets are not to be ignored, because if you go to Maldives, or if you go to Sri Lanka, if you go to Nepal or Bangladesh or what have you, these are not people who are running around with iPhones. They don't have iPhones. They don't have Apple legally supporting them, formally supporting these countries. All the iPhones bought over here are from Singapore or from UAE or New York, for example, or even UK. So it's not that you're going to see, and these people don't have, and the acquiring banks are certainly not qualified enough, because at best they'll ask you, Apple will ask an acquiring bank in Bangladesh, well, how many customers of yours do you know for sure have an Apple iPhone? And if they say something like 25,000, they'll say, thank you very much. We do more sales in New York, for 25,000 cards than we would do for the entire country of Bangladesh. So, they just won't support it. And for something like this, which is we can say it's a modern day hack of an Apple Pay. It's easy to say this after the fact, but it is essentially a modern day hack. But I think it'll be a cool thing to have in this part of the world, where you can just go tap and go, and your payment is done. I am not discounting that. I feel and there's a huge if, there are many ifs actually, if Samsung does market it correctly, puts the price in a reasonable position, because Samsung phones are sold like crazy over here in this part of the world.
Absolutely.
I mean, we have competition from, regional Chinese competitors and so forth, but Samsung is way ahead. I mean, if you ask about an HTC phone or a Motorola phone, nothing like that. There's no comparison to this thing. So I think a reasonably priced LoopPay inductor, which may come actually, I feel will come in form of a Samsung cover, like a phone cover.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think so. It'll be a separate one. Maybe it will be, but most likely it'll come as a cover.
I think they're building it in ultimately. I think you're going to see a phone where it'll be built into the base phone. Now, I got to ask you something, Faisal. In your part of the world, are you swiping or are you EMV chip and pin primarily?
We are morphing right now. So we are morphing from the swipe mechanism for example, I have for the past maybe 10 years, I sign all my credit card receipts with the word Mickey Mouse. I have yet.
I don't even put a signature. Just like scribble.
No, I do. I write Mickey Mouse. I do this on my on everything, on government documents, on on immigration landing papers.
I don't know if you want to open that up.
I want to see where they catch me and stop me. It's never happened before. So for that receipt thing, the merchant's got the money. He doesn't really care about the signature, because the person who's doing it I don't even think he's educated enough or trained enough to understand what
exactly
that a signature has to be matched. He's been told how to do a monkey job. Go swipe card, do this. If this receipt comes out, payment is good. Get it signed. That's it.
Yeah.
So and we are now morphing towards the pin thing. Where the pin pad is given to you and so forth. It's here in quite a few places. Turkey, like I told you last time, everywhere. It's everywhere. 2.3 million passes, 2.1 million passes with chip and pin.
Wow.
So, I mean, that's a huge, huge thing. Every street vendor has it. If you buy ice cream, literally from a street vendor, ice cream, swipe, it'll give you a chip and pin, pin pad. Say, enter it. So I think this thing will have its day, and it's a short day. It's a very short window. Because eventually, I think the chip and pin thing will come, and they'll probably have to move somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the amazing things that we really didn't even touch on was the founding teams, particularly Will Grayland of LoopPay. I mean, this guy
he's incredible.
His track record is just absolutely stunning. I think now he has maybe four significant at least three significant payment companies that he's sold.
I mean, Rome Data was, as far as I'm concerned, the leader of devising these dongle systems.
Yeah.
I mean,
prior to that, it was Way Systems, which sold to Verifone. I mean, Verifone is, that's going to be a target acquisition for many payment companies.
Yeah.
We have to get Will on the show. So
he's a great guy. He's a highly, highly articulate. And I think what the real big story about Samsung, as I'll repeat it, is getting these two guys to stay on. I was looking for that demarcation. Are they buying the technology, or are they building a pay team? And they're building a pay team. So, I love the technology and I love the product. I just think it's almost 10 years too late, unfortunately.
Really?
Yeah.
Don't you think now is the right time to do it? Particularly right after Apple has, kind of hit stride.
No, I would agree. I would agree with Brian on what that 2005 would have been a perfect time to launch this thing.
It would have been brilliant, because they would have started a revolution. And now there's this conflicting dialogue, and it's going to create more befuddlement than I think anybody is planning. But I will never sell short these two gentlemen.
So they just didn't want to take. But LoopPay was started way long ago, right? You're saying that basically Samsung should have acquired LoopPay and gone down this road and been the leader?
Well, we covered LoopPay about I think a year back, and we were saying that we talked about loop induction, and Brian was explaining the whole electromagnetic concept of it all and so forth. And they've been in business about, I think they were in business about maybe 2 years prior when they came out of stealth or something like that. So
the truth be told, there's nothing really unique about induction simulation. I've experimented with this years before this was around. What you can see is in old cassette players, if you had like an iPod back early 2000s, but you had a cassette player in your car, you could buy this little cassette system that you stick into the cassette player, and it comes out with a wire or now Bluetooth and allows you to
connect to your
broadcast
CD
information.
player.
Exactly, or the actual induction to this cassette head. All it was doing was simulating what it looked like as if a tape was going by. And it's exactly this system. So the idea of it really has its inception in the late 70s, first time I saw it. That's what motivated me to kind of play around with this technology. I never saw it as a replacement for a mobile wallet, and I didn't see the innovation that these guys did. But it just took too long to move to the market. And I think it's a great story right now to try to zig to Apple's zag. But the problem is the consumer and the merchant have to be trained, and that is a humongous task.
I don't know. I mean, I definitely, I almost take the side of if you have the experience down, right? Apple kind of paved the way, and then Samsung does this right afterwards. And people who don't have iPhones and live in areas where iPhones and Apple Pay isn't even available or an option, this is something they can use as an ancillary product. This is a fill-in that they can just jump right in. They immediately get it, right? They've seen Apple Pay,
And don't think that it'll work just on Samsung. It'll work on any phone. Okay?
It doesn't matter. I have
Samsung just happens to be the phone company that bought the company.
My LoopPay, my first, I got 5 Kickstarters going with them. I helped fund their Kickstarter. I mean, I bought a lot of these. I already had the pre-production system. I can tell you, I had an iPhone case and I went around doing this. So I'm not really kind of guessing this thing. What I did is I went out and I actually researched it, and I looked at what how they were dealing with it before Apple Pay. And there was a lot of confusion. A lot of people told me that they're going to avoid the transaction and they want my legitimate credit card. I had one gentleman who called the police when I was using a legitimate LoopPay device, the key fob. I just said,
you're so cutting edge, Brian. It stings.
Well, the thing is, it gets more complex when you're moving out to some of the emerging markets. And I'm absolutely fully agree with what Faisal's saying in his points that he makes. But you got to also make sure that guy that's just being trained to run the card and give the receipt or put in a PIN, all of a sudden you show up with one of these in an area where there might be a lot of high crime. How can they be certain that transaction is actually legitimate? How can they be certain it actually went through? So that's the only big challenge. And if I was close, with the company in the early days of, the negotiation, I would have probably really highlighted on those points on being able to certify to the merchant. I think one of the ways is a guarantee to the merchant that the payment will be accepted by their bank.
Yeah, I think it's exciting. It's exciting to see how it turns out, and we'll try to get Will on the show. Okay, we have a couple topics here that are kind of shorter, smaller, but we want to, previous to the show started, we kind of talked about bringing them up in not rapid style format, but just giving a more debate focused answer to them. So this is the 1 year review, or basically we want to check in and see WhatsApp exploded when they were acquired by Facebook for, was it 19 billion, if my memory serves me correctly? Yeah. And to date, we haven't seen any major market moves, any product updates. It's kind of just been idle. Now they have to obviously be working on it, right? It's probably the largest acquisition in my lifetime, from at least Facebook and any similar type, technology company that size. What do you guys think? What's the 1 year take? Is Facebook regretting this? Is this the best move ever? Are there some stats and figures? Faisal, I know previous to the show you had some interesting numbers we could chew on to get started.
So last year when they were acquired, just so this is the first year anniversary for them, they were 450 million active users per month. And today that number is 700 million, so nearly doubled. Facebook's native messenger has now grown to 500 million. Just to give it a comparison with Snapchat, which obviously doesn't release its figures, Snapchat is somewhere north of 100 million users. And WeChat, which is Tencent's chat app, is about 468 million active users in China. So, they've gone from 450 to 700. I think anyone you talk to would probably tell you no regrets on this buy price or the product itself. I think they have access to an amazing ecosystem of users, And I think they own the communication line. I think they will own the e-commerce or commerce line in the days to come.
I would have to agree. I think with that kind of explosive growth and the fact that there's still a lot more upward potential, I think it will wind up being one of the best acquisitions after Instagram for Facebook. I mean, I would still hold out that Instagram was much better acquisition medium term. They simply are taking the oxygen away from a lot of potential social media startups. But long term, I think this acquisition is really where it's going to take Facebook to another level.
Sequoia, who invested in WhatsApp initially, they wrote a really interesting piece, and they had the founders in, and they kind of discussed what the outcome was for the founders, why they did it. Obviously, 19 billion is a pretty strong incentive to do it, but they kind of released their numbers and what they have. They say a couple of stats here. As they say, and this article is from, let's see, when is this from? This is from 2019, so this is fairly recent. And they say 47% growth that they've had in, I want to say just Europe. I think they were dissecting it like that. 450 million active users, like Faisal said. But incredibly, the number of daily active users, WhatsApp, compared to those who have logged in, has climbed 72%. In contrast to industry standard is between 10 and 20%. So
1 year later, when do you think they'll launch?
Well, how do you define launch?
Yeah, this is a complex thing. Will they do an Instagram type thing? What do you mean?
Payments.
Oh, payments. This summer, I think we'll be talking a whole lot about Facebook payments and in a way that I think most people have not been predicting. We have some great minds over there at Facebook payments, and I think they're going to be doing things that'll make Facebook a lot more exciting.
So let me ask you a question, both of you. Do you think they will come out with just a so-so payment system, or will they come out with something really, really unique, just like Apple Pay?
I think unique. I think we'll probably see them not trying to conflict with what Apple's doing, but enhance it. From an egotistical standpoint, you want to say, oh, well, I'm going to try to better what Apple has done. And I would go back to the old analogy I've been giving out for quite a long time, is that if you're the landowner and you own the hardware and you own the software, you don't want to be conflicting with them. You could do much better working with rather than against. So I don't see Facebook as being a disruptor to Apple. I do see Facebook being a disruptor to everybody else in person-to-person payments and some small merchant payments. I think if you're PayPal, Venmo, Square, and a few of the other, smaller payment companies, you really should be looking at your business plans. If you think that you're locked in, you're definitely not.
Now, what could they do? I mean, realistically, what does a company like that do? Because it's extremely difficult and costly to pivot, especially over, ideas that are not concrete, right? If you hear a giant starting to rumble, what does that mean? Does that mean jump to consolidation and try to get acquired?
Well, are you talking about PayPal's coming to go and eat your lunch? What do you do as a startup? Or Apple's coming to payments? All right, well,
how would you give advice to startups that are in the space?
Well, the first thing you do is, let's just look at what Apple did, right? You would have to have been really under 10 feet under the earth not to realize in 2013 that Apple was going to somehow get involved in payments. I don't expect everybody to be visionary and say 2010, 2009, but at least by 2013. And the thing that you don't want to do is, if you know Apple's essentially going to make a wallet, don't make a wallet. Don't make a wallet, right? It doesn't matter how nice it's going to be or how creative it is. It doesn't matter how much your VCs are willing to give you money. Understand that the landowner is going to come back and claim their land, and they may fumble, and then you can do something. But you really need to, unfortunately, react. You cannot disrupt. When it comes to something like Facebook, well, the very first thing I would tell any payment startup or payment company that's last 2 years wanting to get into person-to-person payments, I would say that train long left the station. I don't care how simplistic you've made it. I don't care how elegant it is. you will never be able to get in front of this when you have companies like Venmo and you have companies like Ali and around the world. There's no market for you to achieve. And then you have Google, where you just attach payment to an email. So you have these tremendously well defined, mature companies with high finance that you're going to compete with. So it's a no-brainer that Facebook is going to get involved in person-to-person payments. So if I was a startup in that realm, I would start looking at ways to divest of that direction and focus on the core things, if you're a payments company, that are not being addressed. I assert there's 75 things a company like Square could do right now that have absolutely nothing to do with competing markets. They just don't sound sexy until you actually go out there and spend some time with merchants and actually do real research. Then you realize, wow, this could really last this company another 3 or 4 decades, just 2 or 3 of these things. So don't compete against Apple. Don't compete against Facebook. And don't compete against PayPal, as weak as they might look right now to some people.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'd be forced to agree with you if you asked me explicitly, but I think there's a strong sense of do the thing that you think is needed in the world and ignore the big giants, right? It realistically may be another, who knows? Facebook might even not launch payments, right? There's a good possibility 100%. They will. Maybe they'll focus it on international, unless you have really concrete data to change your business. I think it's hard. Now, if you're talking to a founder who's debating what space to go in and payments are equal amongst healthcare and some other, I think much more needed technology opportunities, I would say don't go that direction. But if you're talking to the guy who's been in payments for a while, he's working on something in the space already and moving towards it, I think it's really hard to pull the plug on something you have momentum in that direction.
There's no doubt, Mike. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to be cruel. I'm actually just trying to be very
it's
frank
realistic.
about it. The bottom line is, you can go out and do whatever you want. And a lot of startups say to themselves, I want to create the world I want to live in. And that's great, and you have a vision of 1, and maybe a vision of 2, a vision of 10, 50, 100, 1,000 people. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the market isn't already being fairly addressed. I mean, let's face it. Are there difficulties for me to send you money right now in the U.S.? No, I have so many options. I scratch my head. And right now, I'm just going to ride on the one that is easier and more convenient. If I had a kid in the university and I had a Chase bank account and I gave them a Chase a debit card, I'm going to send them money through a Chase bank account, and it's not going to touch the outer world.
True.
If I'm going to pay you for something that we had for lunch, maybe it's Venmo.
Yeah.
But
no, there's definitely different.
Where do these
avenues.
other things fit in? Right?
I think Faisal's question is valid, right? Do they come out with essentially the cut and clear image of what we'd imagine it would be, right? And that's you open up WhatsApp, you open up Facebook Messenger. Maybe they're both connected in the same payment network, so you can put a credit card or your bank ACH info in one, right? And it doesn't really matter. Maybe they have maybe the Facebook Messenger and WhatsApp actually get more integrated. One of the things that Facebook does is when you download their app and you try to message people on the mobile app on iOS.
You got to download the Messenger.
You got to download the Messenger, right? And it prompts you to send invites to people who are not in Messenger. So they're definitely making a strong push there to get people to use it.
But I think it's one of those things. In the classical case, is this a problem chasing a solution, or is this a solution chasing a problem?
I mean, I'd have to imagine, Faisal, to me, the big nut to crack is international payments, right? If I could,
it's a huge thing. Everyone I talk to in my daily business is trying to get on that pie.
What if they
Faisal,
do?
It doesn't stop. That is the uncharted territory.
Do you guys think they will, Faisal? Will Facebook announce that WhatsApp accepts payments from 90% of the countries, right? So if I can pay, even me and you have a difficult time.
I'll tell you, and I'll tell you the reason why. A lot, and this is no disrespect to anyone. There is a lot of undue, unwarranted fear of going international payments. The common notion is, it'll be used for money laundering, it'll be used for terrorist financing, it can go, it can jeopardize your banking relationships. It's, we don't want to do work with these countries and so forth. The countries that they don't want to work with are emerging market countries. There's very little data to suggest that small value payments, and let's start with small value payments. are in no way contributing towards any form of anti-money laundering or even terrorist financing. And you have to understand that there's such a complex marketplace, an ecosystem to connect to be able to do seamless, frictionless. That word is so important, frictionless payment. You're on the other side of the world. I just send you money. How it settles into your banking system, into your bank account is something that, an arrangement was done prior and it was done. Do you know the person who, when the Iridium project was launched, the satellite phone by Motorola? Yeah. There's a very great, there's an amazing article in Wired, and I'll share it with you, how these guys were on the road for about literally 2 years or something like that. It was extremely long. They went to each and every country in the world. You have to understand that fact, that each and every country, and signed up each and every mobile carrier. They could not afford to say, no, we'll go to, Indonesia, and out of the 5 carriers, we'll only sign 2. No, they had to have a 100% success rate for each and every country in the world. And they did that. I think that sort of a movement, as far as money is concerned, we have not seen yet. And that is what is required.
Yeah.
Now, why did they have to do that, Faisal, if I can digress there? I've never heard that.
Because they had to settle in and touch all the cellular carriers, so that the calls and the terminals and whatever could be made, so that you would have access to the satellite phone network or something. And the article explains it all, but that's what it was done. Each and every carrier in the world. But that doesn't exist over here. Many people don't know that if you get a sat phone out and if you can get a local tower, it'll just go through the tower.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, that is. So, Faisal, what do you think? Do you think that what Facebook will announce with WhatsApp, that they have full international payments?
Low-hanging fruit. Low-hanging fruit, meaning US, Canada, eventually UK, parts of Europe, maybe ANZ, and that's about it. The other countries will be ignored because, a lot of, and what I mean to say is, when I said don't disrespect, a lot of people who are working in this thing are all based in the US. They haven't been to these territories. They don't know how to initiate the conference, how to get it done.
So Facebook sends Faisal an email, says they want to pay him a ton of money to come bring it to that part of the world. Are you going to entertain that?
Oh, yeah, why not? I've been an advocate for international payments all my life.
They might need
and
advice.
I feel that, we have everything. I can send an email anywhere in the world. I can make a call anywhere in the world. Why can I not send money anywhere in the world?
We're going to look back and it's just going to be archaic.
I got to say this. If anybody over at Facebook or any other company is listening and you're not considering Faisal in your international expansion, you're missing out. I can't think of a better mind in the industry right now.
Yeah.
Well, shifting focus.
Yeah.
Stripe incorporating Bitcoin.
Yes.
What do you think about that? With a single line of code.
I know.
Well, I think it's amazing, right, Mike? I mean, wouldn't you just jump aboard?
Well, here's the thing. I think Stripe's incorporation of Bitcoin just emphasizes the fact that merchants should not think of the dollars coming in as the only potential source, right? I think it just gives, what the biggest thing for me it does, it just gives credit to Bitcoin, right? Now we could throw it on. There's really no cost to it as a merchant. So, with Home Hero, our business, we could throw on, the chances that anyone would actually use it is very small. And maybe you could argue that it's just not worth the engineering cost to implement.
To you two gentlemen, I mean, from the US perspective, doesn't matter, right? Because the payment options are so many, so wide. Why would you want to go and purchase Bitcoins, and then come all over and make a payment via Bitcoins? Again, from the US perspective, it really doesn't make sense. And mind you,
there's no big reason.
All of Stripe's clients are pretty much US, right?
They are in a bunch of other countries now.
They're about 25 countries, I think.
Yeah, I know that's kind of been their core focus is expanding, but it does a few things, right? If your company is unique in a space where if you launch the fact that you had Bitcoin, maybe that gets you some marketing press, and frankly, you might as well give customers every potential avenue to pay you that you can, right? Just to think that there's 1% of customers that don't pay you because they don't, have PayPal or they don't integrate, they don't have a credit card, whatever the thing is. You might as well open it up as big as possible. Like Mark Cuban would say, don't make the best product, make it the absolute easiest to buy. And Stripe just gave you a tool to do that. So I think it's great. I think it's it was inevitable, and it's great that it's an option now, especially because we use Stripe.
And I would add, I think their testing of this first was great. I think it was really well planned, well conceived, and it's a no-brainer. You don't want to add something like this and then have it fall apart. So they really did the right thing. They got a couple of merchants to champion it, saw reasonably good results, and took it throughout their entire platform. So I think it's a good move for them. I think it's great news for Bitcoin. And in some markets, maybe some platforms will start expanding into Bitcoin and it might actually expand opportunities. So there's some great opportunity there.
Faisal, what do you think? Do you think it's going to take off in terms of international? Does it open up some gateways? Some dams are broken down now that such a major payment processor like Stripe use it?
I think it's not the usage or the adoption that I'm sort of looking at. I now look at it more from a viewpoint. Is it going to be legal for many of the people who are going to be using it? Because suddenly, if you're allowed to accept Bitcoins and do cross-border money transfer, where does that leave you? I actually wrote an article on a company that's supposedly not too happy with me right now on my blog. It was about coins.ph, a Philippines company that has a wallet in Bitcoins, and they interfaced with Coinbase. And I'm arguing that, because of the fact that now your users can, from the US, come and load money and send it to Philippines, you are essentially a money transfer company. And because you don't have licenses, this is illegal. Their viewpoint is different. They said, no, we're a wallet, we're not doing it. I said, no. But the fact that the user knows that they can come to your wallet and do this transaction classifies you as an MTO. So I think the legal repercussions would need to be looked at if accepting Bitcoins and applications. A company may have the standard disclosures, just because you can accept Coinbase or Stripe and incorporate Bitcoin, you still have to look at your legal coverage how the transaction, mechanics may change. I think that's the greater question that I'm looking at.
Yeah, it's a good point. So go ahead, Faisal.
I was going to say, I think it's time for Brian to go hit the ski slopes.
Yeah. Why don't we break there? That's a good point. Brian, enjoy the day. Faisal, have a wonderful evening. I think we have a 12-hour difference or so. Great episode, guys. I really enjoyed this one.
Take care. Have a good one. Speak next week.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.